I met one or two of them when I was over here talking with some of the classes last winter at some point. We will try to keep this fairly informal, and whatever questions you might want to ask, you are certainly welcome to. Can't guarantee that we'll be able to give an answer because there's a lot of speculation when it comes to this particular election. I thought first I would say something about a topic that you are familiar with, probably to a degree, and that is the electoral college, how we elect presidents. And it's unique in a way in that it's very different from the way that we typically choose people for office in the United States. Normally, there is a vote, and you don't want any broken legs. Excuse me. Ordinarily, there's a vote, and whoever gets the most votes wins, or in some places there would be a runoff. But our electoral vote is different. Can anyone just tell us how you determine the number of electoral votes that a state gets? Okay, all right.
That's the number of people that are in the state, how many representatives you have in the state, plus your 2 senators.
Yes. So, for example, if a state has 11 members of the U.S. House of Representatives, and all have 2 senators, but if you said the representatives based on the population, 11 plus 2, and that would be 13 for the total number of states have. And there are 538 in all, and it requires 270 to win. Does anyone know of 2 states that are a little different? Normally, it's a winner-take-all. So whoever gets more votes than anyone else in a state gets all the state's votes. But it's up to the states to determine the allocation. And I believe I see a hand wanting to talk about the exception. No. It would be interesting if it were, because both states that have it are small, and if it were Florida, you could just have all kinds of possibilities or splits. That would really complicate things. Would anyone else like to?
Is that one of them from
South Dakota, and did you say Georgia?
I said North and South Dakota.
North and South Dakota? No. Okay.
Is it one of them from
All right.
Is it one of them Vermont?
That's not so far away from one of them. No. Go a little north. Yes. Maine and Nebraska. That's right. They're both small states. Maine has 4 electoral votes, 2 members of Congress, 2 members of the House, 4 electoral votes. And then Nebraska has 5. And the only time we have seen a split since this was adopted by the states was when Obama was elected the first time in 2008, and he carried 1 district in Nebraska, the one that is in the Omaha area. And so in that one case, we had a 4-to-1 split. But these electors are real people. And so when you vote, and some of you may well be voting for the first time shortly, and then others of you will have to wait a couple of years before you can vote, but when you vote, you will, in fact, be voting from people from your state, say 15 people or whatever. So you're voting for slates of electors, and we normally know how an election has come out by the morning after, even if it's a fairly close election. But it's actually not until December that the electors cast their votes. I suppose if some of them wanted to get together and play a big trick on us, that would be the scandal of all times, but maybe technically that could happen. But they don't vote until Wednesday in December, and then in each of the state capitals, for example, Raleigh for North Carolina, they will assemble, vote, and then the ballot, they vote separate ballots for president and vice president, and then they're put together. They are officially transmitted, and it's not until December that we have the Congress convenes for joint session, that we have the count for what's actually going to happen. You're witnessing certainly the meanest election in modern American history for president. Actually, if you go way back, there have been some pretty mean ones, but this one's in an era of television, mass communications. Why do you think this election is such a mean election? Polarization. What specifically related to polarization? That means
it seems that people who are interested in politics can hear their version, their brand, their universe of politics without having to hear a whole lot from the middle or the other side.
Yes. There is a tendency for people often to move toward the middle and to be soothing in a general election. But this one was certainly not soothing. And people, and maybe this reflects our society to a degree, but people will get very angry at one another. Someone in a car repair shop was telling me just a few days ago about two long-time customers. They had both very nice people. They were not people who knew one another. However, they started talking about the election and got very angry. Just a shouting match over this. What do you think might have caused the country to be so polarized? Does it have something to do with issues we're facing right now? Or would it have something to do with the personalities of the candidates? Or what? What do you think about it?
Donald Trump.
You think it's Donald Trump?
Yeah.
Oh, what is it about Donald Trump?
Hillary's a criminal.
Okay. Are you saying that, or did Donald Trump say that? Okay. All right. Probably, if you check closely enough, you might see some activity that could merit indictment on both sides of the fence, as a matter of fact. But what you just said is an indication about this when each side is essentially accusing the other of breaking the law, and when they have a deep, deep distrust of one another, that is certainly an indication of something that is not common. First, I think the fact Trump is in the race probably makes a difference. And it's maybe easy to forget now that when this started out, almost no one in the Republican Party or Democratic Party thought that Trump had a good chance to be the nominee. In fact, the Huffington Post, and they have their own biases, at first treated Trump more in their entertainment section than in their coverage of the presidential election. But after it got started, many people, and I thought the Republican primary was more interesting than the Democratic, although both certainly were of great interest, had their fireworks. But once it got started and Trump started winning in a number of places, a number of individuals said, well, when more and more candidates are eliminated and then we have Trump against just one other person, he will lose. But he was able to hold on all the way through. He certainly did not, as this went through, he certainly did not always win. There were a number of cases where other candidates won particular primaries, but overall, Trump came out on top in the end. And it was really rough in the primaries. because you expect candidates to argue on the issues, to be critical of one another, but Trump was a new face. He had a new approach. And it's interesting now that although Trump's very competitive in this race, that he has not gotten the support of a number of people who were opponents of his in the primary. And normally, everybody comes together in the end, but if you look at the people who were his major opponents, a number of them have refused to endorse anyone at all in the race. And one former Republican president, the older George Bush, apparently has confided to friends that he's going to vote for Hillary Clinton. Most of them haven't endorsed anyone at all, but there's a great split. Why do you think that is? Well, part of it is, Trump, he doesn't mince any words, and he would be responding to one of his opponents in the Republican primary, and he would essentially call the person, this is a direct quote, a pathogenic lie. And you might think he's attacking Hillary Clinton very strongly now, and indeed he is. But he said very similar things about the people he was opposing in the Republican primary. So this has created tremendous friction within the party. The great majority of Republicans are going to vote for him, I would say, but a lot of the leading Republicans are making a point of not endorsing him in this particular election. But yet he catches on, and what do you think it is about Trump that has kept him very competitive in this race?
The anti-establishment.
Anti-establishment. What's the establishment?
Like how things are in Washington right now in politics.
Okay. How things are, and he is anti-establishment, so he says, and certainly most of the establishment is opposing him. For example, we think of Wall Street and the financial community as usually being Republican, but they are strongly opposing Donald Trump in this election. And what he says is that the establishment has ignored the people, and he's paying close attention to the people, and if they really want things to improve in this country, that they need to vote for him. And he says that Hillary Clinton is the very personification of the establishment, and essentially thinks the same thing about the Clintons, Democrats, and the Bushes, Republican. And so he is really on the attack all the way around, and is making a lot of promises that some think are undeliverable, but some people are very hopeful about. And so he is staying in the race partly for that reason. Now, he had had trouble in this race in getting up above about 40%. What's going to be interesting to see is if he can break that and if he can win the election. I was just talking with Professor Lockerbie on the way over, and I think that about a week ago, that probably Hillary Clinton was around 6 percentage points ahead, and probably set to win about 350 electoral votes. But now, with the whole matter about the emails, and there's a lot of controversy not just about the emails, but the way they were brought out, it would appear to be a closer race, but we'll know in 2 or 3 days probably whether or not that is the case. But I think most prognosticators would want to hold off before making a decision in the end. What groups would you say are generally supporting Hillary Clinton? This is the population as a whole, not just the establishment. What groups are tending to support Trump? Are there any particular divisions there?
I'll say African Americans tend to support Hillary Clinton.
All right, in some polls, she's getting 90 to 95% of the vote from African Americans, which would put her as high as Barack Obama was in his 2 elections. So overwhelmingly, African Americans are supporting Hillary Clinton. Why?
His derogatory statements.
Well,
His derogatory statements towards African Americans.
okay, you feel it's derogatory statements toward African Americans. Any other comments?
I was just like, with what he said, I feel like they're just going with their only other choice that they know, since they don't want to vote for Trump.
Yes.
They're just-
A matter of probably pretty much any Democrat would get more votes from African Americans. Also, other groups such as Asians, who are smaller in number, but Asians, natives of the Middle East, are also backing Hillary Clinton in large numbers. Okay, what about Donald Trump? Who's backing him? Okay, well, we will, you write down an estimate when we get through and we'll see how close you are. Anybody's welcome to do that. What groups within the United States, I know you know enough to know that in fact it's a closely stood election. And so Americans are fairly deeply divided. What specific Americans would be backing Trump in large numbers? Who? Republicans? The wealthy? White males? Okay, the wealthy are very split. Usually, the wealthy do back Republicans, and the most highly educated segments in the population do that, but that is not necessarily the case. Among whites, and it would be fair to say he gets more support among Caucasians or whites than other groups, but there's a split. The area where Hillary is weakest of all is among Southern white men in the South. She's the person that many white men in the South have loved to hate for quite some years now. So she's the ultimate demon in their eyes. Interestingly, however, when you go into some areas, a majority of whites, a majority of Caucasians are voting for, or saying they're going to vote for Hillary Clinton. For example, among people with a college, do you have any particular comment? Okay. Among college students, or people who have a college graduate who are white, we're actually showing nationwide that in many parts of the country, and nationwide, that she has the lead. And so whites are actually deeply split, and there are a number of states, like Vermont, for example, where she will carry the white vote overwhelmingly. In North Carolina, Trump will win a majority of whites, but when you go to Raleigh, Durham, Chapel Hill, and that area, you'll find that in many areas, the majority of whites, there will be split, but the majority are actually going to be voting for Hillary Clinton. Well, what's the reason for this? Education certainly relates to it, and to get back to the point among college graduates, she has a big lead among people with lower levels of education. He has a gigantic lead among people who are whites. Now, whites, put it that way, African Americans, both highly educated African Americans and in between, and people of lower education, lower income, African Americans, whatever the income, and generally a lot of Asians, whatever their income, are generally supporting Hillary Clinton. But among whites, there is a split, and you're right that education is a major factor in that. And so one could raise questions too. Why is this the case? I'm just going to say at the moment that it is the case, and perhaps when we have questions later on, we can get more into that specific situation. But in any event, it's exciting. This is an exciting time. I'm sure you'll have some good questions, and I believe I will turn it over to you.
I'd also like to thank you for the opportunity to come before you today, and also before I start my portion of the presentation, for those, and I heard a couple people mention it as they were walking in, they have some interest in politics and East Carolina University, and it would be remiss if I didn't bring any advertising with me here today. So if you're interested in the program at East Carolina University, either political science or security studies, I have some brochures down front on that chair there for you to pick up if you're interested. I, of course, think the political science side is the way to go, since that's what I do for a living. It's one of the
He's
nice
one
things.
of the leading authorities in the country on religion related to politics.
But that won't be what I talk about for the most part today, but if you have some questions about it in the Q&A period that we'll leave some time for, I'll be glad to address those. Like Professor Raymond, I walk around while I talk, but unlike him, I need my notes in front of me, so I'll carry this around today. One thing that was mentioned was that the campaign is tightening up a lot. In part, I think most observers would have expected that before the controversy that came out just the last few days. A week ago, it looked like Secretary Clinton was going to win the election with easily a 5 to 8 point margin of victory, which would have been, by modern standards, a landslide. The last time we've seen anybody win with, say, 8 or 9 point victory would have been Ronald Reagan back in 1984, before any of you were born. But what we're seeing right now is a tightening of the race. I think that reflects the fundamentals of how a campaign is run.
Part of the prelude summit, probably the game summit. You got something, G, go and make your exit quickly. We'll come back in. Don't leave.
Yeah, but the fundamentals of the campaign are such that during any presidential campaign, they're going to get closer. And what would lead many observers to believe this election is going to be a tightly fought, close campaign is that we have a party seeking the third term of office. In a sense, Secretary Clinton is the third term for the Obama administration for the Democratic Party, and that's something that's difficult to achieve. It's happened once in my lifetime when George H.W. Bush won the presidency. So we see that tightening up the campaign, and to tie it in a little bit of what Dr. Eaom said a little while ago, that comes into play with the Electoral College. Right now, the election itself, the popular vote, looks very close, but there are a lot of states that are still in play. We see some things that are tightening up right now. Because of that, the Electoral College still looks like it's favoring Secretary Clinton tremendously, but where it gets interesting, at least from a political scientist perspective, is the role of minor parties, which also helps us to understand why the campaign should be tightening up. If we look at, well, who are the minor party candidates out there running right now? Gary Johnson is the biggest one. She's got a major party nomination. But you've got Gary Johnson, the Libertarian Party candidate, who started out polling at about 8 or 9% of opinion polls. As we progress through the campaign, we've seen his numbers steadily drop. Jill Stein is another one. Her numbers started low and they're staying there. But we see the numbers dropping as the campaign gets to a close. What happens is that people who don't really like either of the major party candidates frequently will align themselves with a minor party candidate, at least at the outset. Don't have to be this year, it can be any presidential election year. But this year, we've got two of the most disliked candidates in modern American electoral history. People thoroughly dislike both Secretary Clinton and Donald Trump. A good many of them went to Gary Johnson at this point in time, leaning towards him, saying they're going to vote for him. But he was at 8 or 9% about 2.5 weeks ago. He's down at about 3% of the polls right now. His supporters have split back to whichever major party candidate they find less objectionable. And they have not split uniformly toward one side or the other, in part because libertarians are not uniformly conservative or liberal on the issues. Where does Gary Johnson come down on the liberal side? Marijuana legalization, he is pro-choice, and he has taken stands that are probably surprising to some libertarians against what would be called religious liberty bills. Normally, one would think a libertarian would say businesses can do whatever they want, discriminate against whomever they want. But he's taken a position contrary to the stereotype. But he's also taken very conservative positions on economic policy. And so some of those, such as tax rates, business regulation, and so we've seen the people who care most about economic issues probably have gone for Donald Trump. Those who care most about social issues like abortion have gone for Hillary Clinton. That also causes the tightening of the race right now. Third-party candidates really play a modest role in the end, with perhaps, I would argue, the exception of H. Ross Perot back in 1992. But even there, I think his role is often overstated because he pulled votes from both sides. It's just how much differential there was between George H.W. Bush and Bill Clinton back in 92. Now that being said, why would anybody vote for a third-party candidate today? They still hate both choices. They look at Clinton, they look at Trump, and they say, God help us. See, I did work a little religion in politics. But they look at both those candidates and they say, I can't stomach a vote for either one of them. But they know that their choice is not going to win the presidency. Even if you are a supporter of a third-party candidate, and I know many people who are voting for third party more this time than in the past, know that their choice is not going to be the president, know that their choice is not going to be competitive to be president. But they still vote for their third-party candidate. Now they do this because they do hate both sides. They thoroughly dislike Trump and Clinton. And so they want to be able to tell themselves, I showed up and voted on election day. I did my civic duty. They also want to be able to look at themselves in the mirror the next day and say, I didn't vote for whoever won, because they dislike both those candidates so much. But also they do it in part to send a signal. A lot of people vote for minor party candidates, not because they think they're going to change the outcome, but because they think they might influence the parties in the future. But the only way a third-party candidate is going to alter the outcome this year, and this is quite fanciful. Political scientists enjoy this sort of stuff. Frankly, it's a counterfactual. It's not going to happen. If it does, you heard it here first nonetheless, is if neither candidate gets a majority in the electoral college. But a minor party candidate gets some electoral votes. The last time a minor party candidate won electoral votes was 1968. That was George Wallace of Alabama. He won several southern states, the Deep South. But Richard Nixon still was capable of getting over the magic number of 270. This year, the election is so tightly fought, and so many states are tightly fought, that, again, a bit fanciful, but it's possible nobody would get a majority of the electoral college vote because one candidate could get some electoral votes. It's not one of the major party candidates. Who might that be? Has anybody heard of that person? Evan McMullen. Why might he be able to get some votes? Even though when I asked third-party candidates, maybe you weren't in here, but nobody gave his name.
He's polling well in Utah.
He's polling very well in Utah, his home state. Utah has voted Republican since the presidential election of 1968. This would be the first year they don't, if it happens this way, that they don't vote for the Republican candidate. It looks like it's a tight three-way race right now. Evan McMullen is an independent candidate for the presidency. He's running as a write-in candidate in most states. Some states he's on the ballot, such as in Utah. Each state gets to make up their own rules for how you get on the ballot. As a side note, North Carolina is the most difficult state in the union as a minor party candidate to get on the ballot. But if Evan McMullen were able to pull the electoral votes of Utah and nobody gets a majority of the electoral college vote, he either can be a kingmaker and basically say to both sides, what will you get? I saw one commentator being even more fanciful than that, saying both sides might look at him and say he's the least objectionable of the other two. So those who like Hillary Clinton might say, well, I don't want him going for Trump, so we'll vote for him. I don't think that's going to happen. The other fanciful thing that could happen is that Evan McMullen could pick somebody else and urge his electors to vote for that person. I heard one observer comment that maybe he would say, I'm not really ready for the presidency yet. Mitt Romney, my fellow Utahite or Utahian, should be president. I'll urge my electors from Utah to vote for him. All these things are fanciful. I think we ultimately will wind up with a majority of the electoral vote going to one of the presidential candidates. I think it will be a very close campaign when we get to the end, I think the winner will probably not get over 51% of the popular vote. I think we're going to be another nail biter. We are, as some observers have put it, a 49-49 nation with 2% that are fluid between elections. 49% of us vote Republican, 49% of us vote Democrat, and a few percent, 2%, to keep the math straight there, are fluid between the two parties from election to election. Because if we look at the last several elections, they've been pretty close. Barack Obama did not win in any landslide. He got, I think, 52% or so in his first bid for election, and he did a little bit worse than that in 2012. George W. Bush got about, I think, 51 or 52% his second time. He got less than 50% his first time. Bill Clinton never exceeded 50%. George H.W. Bush got about 53 or 54%. That's the closest we've had to a landslide in a long time. I would expect this election ultimately to be decided on a razor's edge. And seeing that we have roughly 15 or so, 20 minutes left, and we were told to leave at least about that much for questions, and because I've run out of my notes, I'll shut up now and we'll be glad to address questions if you might have.
How?
Yeah.
Who counts on those?
Officially, it is done by a joint session of the House and Senate, presided over by the Vice President of the United States. So if you want to see a sad-looking video, go back to the election of 2000. Who was counting the votes in 2000? What person presided over the Senate in 2000?
Al Gore.
Al Gore. Poor Al Gore had to sit there and basically say, I lost. And what made it worse were some of his Democratic colleagues in the House of Representatives tried to challenge the results. And they kept raising, I have an objection to the electoral vote. And he would say, is there a senator who will join in that objection? Nobody did so. Ultimately, he had to announce that George W. Bush beat him.
Wow.
Bless you.
Follow-up question?
Why is that?
Speak to